This person that we spend 24 hours a day with 7 days a week, right, is yourself. And to live with someone that closely that you don't really like is hell. And I think self-compassion is seeing your own goodness. It's having a what I call a correct view of yourself. It includes the ability to give yourself grace, comfort yourself in time of need, treat yourself the way you would treat a friend. Yeah, I've expanded it out quite a bit.
This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck. Welcome to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I am one of your hosts, Michael Nash, and not with me today is Ethan Nash. We are going solo. I'm launching my solo career here. Not quite launching. I've done a couple of these. Ethan's done several. I'm going to be hanging out with various consultants on our team, one at a time, and just having some great conversations. We're having a bit of a cocktail hour tonight. I have my Manhattan, and with me tonight is Hana Butler. Hana, what are you drinking tonight?
Tonight I have a Negroni. I went for a gin-based drink today.
Awesome. Well, here, cheers.
Cheers to you.
I am excited about this conversation. I've asked Hana Butler to talk with me, have a conversation with me tonight about self-compassion. And Hana, we haven't done any scripting. We haven't done any prep for this other than just to kind of lay the guidelines for the conversation. And I wanted to ask you, Hana, why do you think, this might put you on the spot, why do you think I chose you for this conversation? Why did I think of Hana?
Yeah.
I thought about, let's talk about self-compassion. What do you think?
Oh yeah, that's not the question I expected. I actually had that question. I asked myself. I think my guess would be I tend to share fairly vulnerable things with our team about my life as a parent, specifically as a coach, as a trainer for our consulting agency. And I think through my willingness to share the places where I feel like I really mess up, I also tend to be fairly open to receiving any advice, wisdom, and support from our team around how to move through those. But I also, I really embrace how to get better at dealing with the voices in my head that tell me that I'm not good enough, that I don't deserve to be here, that what I did just voted me off the team, and how to really, I feel like I really wrestle with those things internally, but externally within my community. So maybe that is why, because it's something we've talked about.
Interesting. That's insightful, and I guess I'd like to share with you on it's maybe just one piece of the pie. I would say that, yeah, I think your authenticity around your human struggles around self-compassion certainly put you on my radar for this conversation. I would also say it's because you're probably one of the more compassionate and graceful people I know toward others, and I think that's a reflection of the way that you at least hope to treat yourself or attempt to treat yourself. I think you also, this might sound weird, but I think you believe in self-compassion, meaning I think you value it. I think you're one of these people who actually get that really, really matters. And you're on a growth trajectory for yourself toward that. So I guess you're a fellow journeyer. So I think I chose you for those reasons.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Yeah. Well, good to be here on the journey of this topic of self-compassion, because that's what it is, a journey. I know that you and Ethan have talked about this, but how do you describe or define self-compassion?
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting because I think that for a long time I thought of self-compassion in a more narrow category of when you've done something, when you're suffering in some way, that you are able to comfort yourself. You're able to give yourself compassion. And that suffering might be shame, which I think is one of the kind of the keys of this whole topic. When you're suffering from shame, you're able to give yourself grace, you're able to give yourself forgiveness, etc. I think I've expanded that definition of self-compassion to be including just how we perceive ourselves. There's this person that we spend 24 hours a day with 7 days a week, right? Is yourself. And to live with someone that closely that you don't really like is hell, right? It's just hell. And I think self-compassion is seeing your own goodness. It's having a what I call a correct view of yourself. It includes the ability to give yourself grace, comfort yourself in time of need, treat yourself the way you would treat a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've expanded it out quite a bit. How about you? How about you? How do you define self-compassion?
Yeah, I would agree with all of those things. I love language and I find the power of language to be really important to get to this granular level of what words mean so that when we're utilizing them, we know that they're actually interacting with our brain in a way that also then creates a physiological reaction. So to get super granular on the word compassion, we know it means to suffer with, and
Mm-hmm.
that word passion means suffering. And so, yeah, I think at the core root of compassion, it's how can I be with suffering of myself and of others? And then that digging into the self-compassion of how can I be with all those parts of myself that I maybe love and then the other parts that I don't love so much. And we are our biggest critics, like you said, living in our bodies and our minds and our souls. We see ourselves the least accurate out of others. And so to be able to not just say the things that I really like about myself, but to really give myself that same compassion for the things that I don't really like about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then how can I provide that space for others?
That's really good. I think what I've done is I've taken self-compassion and I've melded it. And I tend to like the way I've melded it with self-acceptance, which is not exactly the same thing. But I think they're twin brothers or cousins or whatever they are. I think they fit together. I think they need to go together. So comfort myself in times of suffering, but even or related to that, but maybe just as important, more important, really see myself accurately, see myself, accept everything about myself. That doesn't mean I don't want to change. That doesn't mean I don't want to grow. Acceptance doesn't mean complacency, but
Mm.
it really is a sense of I am okay. I am enough. I am a good, my goodness is it's present. I believe in it. I trust in it. Right. I think that's all related to self-compassion for me.
Yeah, I love that. So when you talked about the word shame, and I guess like just also to get really specific about that, like what is shame?
Great question. Let's play with that, and then let's get to, well, we're a management uh, podcast. We're a company that helps managers grow in their management skills. Let's talk about how this relates to that. But I want to start with what you've just asked. I think that's really important. In fact, that's a question that I think there's some misunderstanding about that out there. I think there's been times I've talked about shame with clients or friends, and I think they get that mixed up with guilt. Um, guilt is, I think, it can go wrong, of course. It can be unhealthy, but I think in general, guilt is a pretty healthy emotion. It says I've done wrong, and hopefully it leads us to, go fix the thing, right?
Yeah, it's actually fairly motivating. Guilt can be really is as a motivating external, and because there's differentiation between me and the thing that I did that was wrong.
That's really good. Yeah, that's the key right there, because shame is the deep-seated core belief that there is something terribly wrong with me, that I am broken, that I'm
Yeah.
bad. And it can be a really huge. It can be a sense of your lack of goodness that takes over your entire life. It can be very trauma-based. It can be horrible. It can be much milder, but it can still get in the way of healthy living. I think we'll talk more about this. It gets in the way of relationships. It's not helpful. It absolutely doesn't motivate, right? I don't think shame, whether we're shaming ourselves or shaming someone else, actually motivates toward change. What do you think?
No, I feel it. I think of it as a big wet blanket. That's what it feels like to me. And that's actually what I encourage a lot of my clients to do, right? Like if is to get, again, we have to get really granular about these differences, because when we use the words, they actually create that feeling for us. So if I say that I'm embarrassed, that means it's like a blush, like it comes into my face, turns my cheeks red, and oh, well, I walked out of the bathroom and I had toilet paper on my foot, or like I farted in yoga class. I mean, God, we'd all done it. So here we are. That was embarrassing. Usually it means I can laugh about it later. But then we get to guilt. Now it's this thing that I did that I can, I didn't do that right. I told that employee that they should have done something that was actually my job, and now I'm guilty about it, but I can motivate it because I differentiate. And humiliation is more of this thing where the boss called me out in a meeting and told me that I didn't do something right, even though I know that I know what I did was right, but he's just humiliated me in front of the entire group. And humiliation is what we're finding more and more research around, tied to revenge type acts, because it fuels this deep kind of seated rage over time. But yeah, this feeling of shame is more of this wet blanket feeling that's, I am bad, I'm broken, I'm irredeemable.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually just creates a huge heaviness just on my being, even if I say the word. And
Yeah.
I think, and this is where, when we enter into these places of shame, that self-compassion is the key, because they can exist at the same time, right? Like once we're feeling these deep places of shame, and we come in with kind of this shining sword of self-compassion, that's what can help dig us out of the depths, so that we can actually become more action oriented, which is what, empathy is, this thing where I'm naming the emotions underpinning an experience. But compassion also is action oriented, it's service oriented, and it can refill our engines and give us more energy towards things. So I think that's what's, again, really important to know about self compassion, how important it is, whether in our personal lives or our workplaces. It's the fuel that turns us towards positive action rather than being in that wet blanket, like
That's good.
negative action. Yeah.
Let's take a few more minutes on the wet blanket. I just, the experience of shame, I believe, and I've read this in several places over this last couple of years. I think that the actual experience of shame, right, that there's something deeply wrong with me, I'm not a good person, let's look at it that way. I think that is the worst feeling ever. And I'm not saying that with any kind of hyperbole, or I just believe that, I mean, there's some really horrible feelings out there. Grief is horrible. At the same time, grief leads toward restoration, right? Grief has an endpoint that is a positive place eventually as you heal the wounds, right? Sadness feels sad. Anger feels angry. None of these things feel good, but that sense that person that I'm living with 24/7 is not a good person. I think that human beings do everything we can to not feel that. I think it's true suffering, actually, to feel shame. I think that's why self-compassion, which is, again, caring for the suffering and comforting, coupled with learning to accept who I am, which is the antidote to shame, right? Those go hand in hand. And I would also suggest, and I wonder what you think about this. I'm actually confused about this. I know I'm not the only one. I mean, I know that lots and lots of people suffer from shame. I suffer from shame in the sense that for various reasons, including my traumatic childhood. But does anybody not suffer from shame? I guess I'm wondering about this. Do you think this is a universal experience, and maybe it's a matter of degree, but everybody has it? Or are there people out there that just love who they are all the time?
I would argue that part of the human condition and part of having a brain, having this thing called bias, right? And again, that we tend to see ourselves more inaccurately than others do, even when meeting us for the first 5 minutes.
Say more about that. You said that earlier. You believe that we see ourselves more inaccurately than others see us.
Well, I think it has everything to do with the negativity bias that tends to be in our brain, linked back to that really cool thing we call the amygdala, right? Which we've talked about so many times. And that its main job is to really set us up for identifying threats and rewards. And so it really has a strong bias towards the things of negativity, or it will put everything in the negativity pot until you prove it otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And we're that same way. Like our being is the same. It's almost like we have to prove to our amygdala that we are a reward, not a threat to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this amazing thing that we have is our brain that allows us to create everything from rocket ships to amazing, children. The most creative thing we can do, I guess that's our bodies, not our brains, but we do have this tendency to be Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. And so
that helped us survive through the eons, right? That's a survival mechanism. If we look for the bad, we keep ourselves safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if I can predict the worst case scenario, then I'm going to know how to survive when it comes. So I think I would venture to say that all humans, this is part of the human condition, is to have this place of inner judgment, inner questioning of our worth. And most human beings in any room, if you ask, have you ever struggled with not feeling good enough? I feel like everyone would raise their hand. Now, if they had some kind of elixir of honesty, if we open it up to, let's say, if we all experience shame, if we all experience these gremlins or imposter syndromes, whatever voices we want to call it, how does it show up in these places especially when we have leadership and power? Like, what happens to us when we inherit a sense of power or we inherit a sense of leadership over a group of others? How may that inhibit us from being able to actually have awareness of these places that are human, that are part of every single being and soul on the planet, where we question our inherent worth, where we question our innate goodness?
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when we get power? And how does that influence or impact our ability to either name that we have that same place, right, of vulnerability, or that we have that same voice in our head? And how does self-compassion, why does it matter so much for our leaders to actually have that?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was hoping to go. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So one of the questions that I often will ask a group of leaders is, why might a person who is struggling with unrecognized, unexamined, huge self-esteem problems, right? A person who is their inner critic is super loud and they just don't like themselves, but they really aren't dealing with that. Why might that person as a manager struggle as a manager? What might show up in their management? Why might their employees, in fact, in some way suffer for that? And then to go the other side of the coin, why might a manager, a leader who recognizes their tendency towards shame and counteracts that with a growth mindset, with personal growth, with self-compassion, who's actively working on self-compassion, how might that show up in their management? Let's play with both of those for a minute. And let's go back to the first part of that. How might somebody who is not aware of their shame, but their shame is loud, their shame is prevalent for them, in what ways might that show up? What do you think? How might that show up in their management, and why?
Yeah, and I think this is really an important question. And I think this is really the magic of coaching and why coaching is actually so important for people, for anybody. I mean, as adults, we actually get ourselves into these roles where we have this thing called quote unquote power over others. And it can be everything from whether you're coaching a little league team, or being a parent, or whether you're running a massive corporate entity. And I think the main message here is that we all struggle. We all have this. We all have these gremlins. I like this word gremlin. Or this part of ourselves, these messages and voices in our head that are shouting things at us that are usually negative. And how we deal with those is ultimately what comes down to making us really great in our jobs or our roles that we have. And how, if we don't deal with them, that's, I think, what you're talking about, is how might this show up for someone who's not really aware of this. And I'd like to actually take us into, like, I think we need to give some examples. And I don't manage a bunch of employees, but I manage two tiny little humans who really challenge me in all these aspects. And I can only say that for me, in a moment of, I'm coaching my son's soccer game and he does something that's not right, not quote unquote right, and he stops the ball in the middle of play because he's roughhousing on the sidelines. My need for showing up as perfect to all the other parents, to all the other kids, to playing the game quote unquote right, shows up in the way that, like, I physically moved him from meaning I accidentally, like, pushed my child off the sideline over a bench. And for me in that moment, I mean, it was everything in fast and slow motion, because my shame, this deep-seated feeling of not being, I wanted to be enough. Like, I wanted to be really good. I wanted to win. And then to get this moment where that's not going right. And so my emotions take over, or that deep part of myself shows up, and I do something that I regret. Right. So it's like, yeah, I think
let's play with that one. So your need at that moment isn't about, I mean, secondary. I'm going to posit here that secondary was winning, secondary was etc. Primary was not be seen for not good enough, not for people. You didn't want anyone to see you the way you were seeing yourself in that moment, right? That's shame. And so you act in a way that makes things better, makes things perfect, makes things right, so that you show up in a way that's not negative, right? Because if others see your negativity, this is actually what I think we struggle with shame. If others see the negative in us, it just confirms our suspicion, right? It's like the jury came in and said, yeah, you're right. Yep, we agree, you're bad. And so we do something, right, to make it less likely that people are going to see that. And in that case, you made this move, right? You moved your son, you did this thing that was for you, right? So that you wouldn't have to feel so bad about yourself. And I think that's such a beautiful analogy to what managers might do, right? And like you say, anyone in a leadership role, right? We don't want anyone out there to confirm to ourselves that we are bad, so we're going to fix it. And that might mean micromanagement. That might mean over control. Does that ring true?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's a self-defense mechanism, because again, of that place of vulnerability and exposure, where
exposure. Yep.
It's exposure to the raw parts of imperfection.
Yes.
And if I spend so much time putting on my facade of, this is who I want you to think I am, right? And look at what our culture supports, right? In terms of the mask that we're encouraged to wear, in terms of youth and beauty and all these things. So it's the same with what is encouraged, social constructs around what does a leader look like? What does a manager look like? And when that person doesn't feel like they match up to those constructs that we've created, what happens in those moments of dissonance? Right.
It's our buying into those expectations, right? But that's going to be based on our level of whether we like ourselves or not. I mean, to make this super simple, right? If I'm good with who I am, I'm going to have a lot more insulation against those, or a lot more defense against some of those messages out there that say, I need to be better, right? I need to do these things so that people don't notice that there's something deeply wrong with me. If I don't believe there's something deeply wrong with me, I'm not going to be as susceptible to those messages, right? And so here's a case where, okay, so I'm afraid that people are going to see what I already see, which is I'm not a good person. That's shame, right? So I'm going to do this thing. What else might I do as a leader? you might try to give me feedback. You might try to tell me that you're not appreciating something that I've done or said or decided, and I might get really defensive. Why am I getting defensive right now? I'm getting defensive because you're pointing out something that it makes my alarm bells go off. Uh-oh, they're going to confirm that there's something deeply wrong with me. That's what this feedback represents, right? I think that's what shame does as in a leadership role. And obviously we could talk about non-leadership roles just in a relationship, in any relationship, right? But these messages of I have, this critical feedback coming at me is terrifying because it's going to confirm to me that there's something wrong with me.
And so, I mean, this is where, again, as a coach, we would just say to our client in this moment, and so what if there is something wrong with you?
Yes. How can we learn to hold that and accept that how can we learn to be radically accepting of the fact that we have flaws?
Yeah. And that power and humility and this ability to play with this word vulnerability is actually what gives us this incredible ability to know power with versus power over. And, I can't continue on without naming like Brene Brown and her research and her books have really been some of the most influential in this line of work. I think bringing in this language and the language into our organizations, into our leadership roles. And that I think we're arguing for or not, or just digging into is that to be a really amazing leader and to know and how to have power is to be able to also know how to hold these places in ourselves that are imperfect, that require vulnerability and curiosity and humility. These things we call adaptive skills, right? There's these things that we can grow and we can learn no matter how old we are, but that require this thing called the growth mindset, which you mentioned earlier. And so, I mean, one of the things that I guess the question I would have for you is like, how do you think that in all of your work of coaching folks and working in these trainings of less correlation between the growth mindset and self-compassion?
They're absolutely correlated. I believe that, I mean, to kind of get to that a roundabout way, I think self-compassion, and this is one of these statements that again sounds hyperbolic, but I think that self-compassion is the most important emotional IQ adaptive skill concept that we can grasp, that we can learn. I think self-compassion it's the foundation of everything else, because I believe that to the degree that we are terrified of being revealed for how bad we really are, to the degree that we're terrified of actually having to accept that we are a bad person, that fear that we have, there's something wrong with us, I think that keeps us from any other growth. I think that keeps us from actually learning anything else. I think it actually makes it almost impossible to have a growth mindset when we just don't like ourselves, because we spend all of our energy protecting ourselves from this horrible reality that there might be something, that it might be true, this thing that I suspect, this thing that I strongly suspect, right? That there's something wrong with me. That might be true. So all my energy goes towards fending that off. So when you try to give me corrective feedback, or instead of learning from that and being open to that, I have to go into self-protection mode, because it's the worst thing in the world to believe that there's something wrong with me, and I have to fend that off. And when my employees don't perform to the degree that I would like them to, oh my gosh, I have to protect from anyone noticing that there's something wrong with my management. So I have to micromanage, or I have to do this thing. And I can't, here's another thing, and I think this gets to a little bit of growth mindset. If I see you, Hana, succeeding, right, or doing something wonderful, or having this amazing trait or quality that I don't think I have, I can't celebrate that with you. I can't give you praise for that, because that is just another sign. See, there's something wrong with me, right?
Yeah.
Broken. I'm not as good as you. So instead of being happy for you and giving you praise and giving you recognition like a wonderful partner or manager or friend would do, I have to find a way to maybe knock you down a peg, or whatever it is. I just think there's so many multiple negative behaviors that come out of somebody who has, I'll call it sort of undiagnosed, unexamined issues with, with self-hate or not loving themselves. And so the antidote to that is, this is really the long way of saying that I think that growth mindset and self-compassion have to go hand in hand.
Yeah. And I think growth mindset, again, to kind of if we define what that is, right, that ability to just say, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm willing to embrace failure as an opportunity for growth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to say that, how can I take this as an experiment versus an answer? Mm-hmm. So this idea of encouraging experimentation is one of the key habits of growth mindset. Then the ability to involve others in my learning. So to your, like, we have to see other people as our allies versus the threats. Mm-hmm. And also that ability to we have to be able to give ourselves kudos for the little things that we do that are different. Our brain tends to get really hyper focused on those big, large outcomes. Like, oh, I really want to lose 10 pounds. Well, and there could be, again, back to self-compassion and the growth mindset. If we don't actually celebrate every pound that we've lost, right, we're going to have a really hard time actually continuing on the journey to get to 10. So we have to find these little ways to value the progress that we're making towards making our way through the muddy waters of the human condition. Whether it's a tangible thing of losing 10 pounds, or I really want to learn how to not lose my temper so much. When my kids don't do what I ask them, or when my employee gives me feedback, how do I get not so defensive?
See, and you're describing this openness to experience and failure, and seeing all these, seeing our setbacks as opportunity. I mean, you're describing this way of being that I think is impossible if we're just at war with ourselves. We can't do that, right? We are only in defense mode. And here's what happens, right? Instead of failure being an opportunity, and it becomes, oh, there's another sign that there's something wrong with me. And that neuroplasticity around that is what continues to deepen, right? We keep practicing this self-harm. We keep practicing this beating up on ourselves. Basically, we traumatize ourselves over and over and over again, instead of what you're describing, which is taking these as opportunities, right? That ability to take these things as opportunities requires something that's the opposite of shame. It requires us to be able to hold our imperfections with grace. It requires ourselves, really honestly, to see our goodness, to see our basic goodness and believe in that, as opposed to some kind of basic badness. I think that's the ultimate, that's kind of the root of this is, how do you, Hana, Mike, how do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as basically good? Do we see ourselves with good hearts, with a lot of conditioning that has created some bad habits and some bad reactions and some things that we really want to, we want to change and we want to recover from and grow through? Or do we see ourselves as fundamentally bad or fundamentally broken? I think that's the difference right there.
I think I have multiple things that I could go on in my brain, but one of the things I really hear in the way you're reflecting on this is this idea and this practice, this internal mindset around assuming good intention. And it sounds like such an easy terminology, not only to practice with ourselves, but especially to practice with others. And one of the things that I love, again, from Brene Brown's work is this, and we bring it up in our trainings quite a lot around, okay, so this is all great. Mike and Hana, what you're talking about sounds wonderful. And yet, okay, what the heck does it look like, right? And so what's one of the internal mindsets that I have to really focus on and actually expend quite a bit of energy, a lot, is to assume good intentions rather than to let my judgments run rampant. Now, my judgments, like, oh, well, that person is overweight, they're lazy. Or, well, that employee, they haven't been here very long, so they don't know what they're doing. Like, these are judgments that happen on a quick snap assumption based on what this person looks like, sounds like, right? Social constructs, all these other layers going on. And yet, if I can then practice assuming good intentions, what actually ends up happening is that I realize, or I can shift this place in myself that says, okay, if this person is doing the best that they can, then what does that mean about me? Because judgments are an external, outward based thing that actually are almost a blame. And sometimes blame feels like fixing because I can just put it on them and therefore it's their fault. But if I can assume good intentions, then that actually means that I turn that back onto myself and I have to say, okay, what is it that I'm doing or not doing? How can I be with this situation or this behavior or this way of this, that allows me to own what's mine and then also see what's somebody else's and what do they need, right? And what do I need?
And I, as you're saying that, Hana, that's so beautiful. I think of inside out or outside in. And I think that I believe that we have to go inside and then out. You know what? I'm gonna take that back. I think you don't have to choose one or the other. I think you can do both at the same time. But here's the thing: you've heard of the MGI, most generous interpretation.
Yeah.
It's LGI, right? Least generous interpretation. Like wouldn't that be great if I could go through life and just always give the most generous interpretation to others, right? As opposed to the least, right? But where does that come from? Again, that comes from the way we treat ourselves. I think that's the root of this. To the degree that I'm able to give myself the basically the most generous interpretation, but even deeper than that, to the ability that to the degree that I'm able to see myself as basically good, and to see myself as a good human being and not see myself as fatally flawed. If I can see myself as good, I am so much more likely to see others as good. Right? We know that. We know the way we treat ourselves tends to be the way we treat others. The way we think about ourselves tends to be the way we think of others. So I think it's an inside out journey, mostly in that sense. Although I think it can be supported by, as you're saying, to some degree, an outside in journey, right? I can practice doing that to others. And then I can be reminded that, oh, wait a minute, I should probably be doing that here as well. So I think it can work both ways. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, this could go again. And then the deeper territory for me is if one of my utmost life values, right, the things that motivates, influences me and drives me internally and then externally in my behaviors is to feel connected. If I do not feel connected to myself,
Right.
then I will not ever actually be able to offer true connection to others.
Inside out. Perfect. Yes.
What it'll actually show up as often and how it does actually is it shows up as control versus actual, really true, authentic connection. And I think so this deep knowledge, this again goes back into, if we take in again, what do we do as coaches? What is our job? Our job is to help our clients in whatever roles that you are, but specifically in our management and leadership roles. This is what we love to do with you, right? Is we love to take this journey with our clients around what are the ways in which that you are judging yourself? And then what are the ways you're judging others versus how do we change that into coaching ourselves? And into coaching our employees, helping us to become our best selves. And we can't ask that of others if we're not willing to do the work within ourselves. And so one of my questions for you, Mike, is in terms of your work, like, what does it look like when you're in those moments where it could be really easy to have the default mode that says, well, you suck. You just messed up bad and you are broken.
Wrong.
You're wrong. Whatever the voices are, what do you do to help get yourself out of those moments and back into a place of feeling connection?
That's a great segue. In fact, I was looking at the time and I was just literally, as you were saying, I'm thinking, let's get to some, what do we do? How do we heal? What are the solutions? How do we work toward a place where we hold ourselves with compassion and grace? And so thank you for that question. Let's both answer that. Let's kind of check off all sorts of possibilities here. But I would say, I mean, this isn't simple, but it's simple in a way. It's mantras, right? It's holding on to statements that here's the idea. There's what I actually believe with my head, with my prefrontal cortex. Like I actually truly believe this. And then there's of course what I believe with my body, what I feel, which don't match up a lot of the time, right? And unfortunately, as humans, we are driven by the feeling. We're driven by how it feels, right? My brain tells me, meaning I actually believe these things. I believe that we are born with a good heart. I believe that we are born, that we come into this world, with goodness. I actually believe that. And I think that the things that we do or think that are not helpful, meaning our flaws, our tendencies, our addictions, our bad habits, whatever these things are, those aren't us. Those are things that we've been conditioned toward. Those are survival mechanisms. Those are things that have become part of us, but they're not actually our core self. And so all this to say, the truth is I am a good man with a good heart. And I tell myself that. That's a mantra. I am a good man with a good heart. I believe that in my head. I don't always believe that with my body or with my vagal nerve or with my, with all my emotions. But it is a thing that I believe is true. And so that's one of the things I think is really important for us as humans as we grow towards self-compassion, is that we find some mantras, we find some truths, and we hold on to them, and that we work some neuroplasticity around these beliefs, that we say them to ourselves, that we practice believing them, and that we don't spend too much time feeling bad about not believing it deeply in our heart, right? That kind of defeats the purpose. I'm believing this with my head, I'm not believing it with my heart, so therefore there's something wrong with me. I've just cycled back into this lack of self-compassion. But instead I practice these mantras. So it might be I'm a good person with a good heart. Do you have any of those? Do you have any particular mantras that help you see yourself more accurately?
Yeah. And again, I think what you're hinting at, so the word mantra, right? We're just trying to come up with what are the words? Because again, words have so much power.
The words that represent a belief.
Yeah. And so finding these words that represent our beliefs are really important, I think, for every single person to find that work for us in those moments of high stress, hyper vigilance, and hyper emotional reactivity. So again, just to make this real, right? So my story with my kid on the soccer field, and I have this emotional reaction to the fear of not being, perfect and messing things up. And so I actually physically remove him from the field onto the sideline, so in other words, everyone, this looks like I pushed my 7-year-old child and he fell over the bench. And this is in front of both teams, all these other parents. These are all people I've grown up with. And I hold my reputation and I hold the way that I show up in society very important. I'm also coaching all of these other kids. And I will tell you, in those moments, all of those terrible words came into my head of, they're going to call CPS. They don't trust you with their children. I mean, you just, hurt all of the things. So I'm not going to say this was easy. And this, I think, is really important. There's going to be little moments where you can just say something to yourself, like if I'm having something with a client that doesn't go well, I can just remind myself, I did the best that I can, and I'm there for them. And then there's going to be these other moments in my life where it takes a week or more. And this, for me, this example with my child was one that it took multiple days of having to deeply dig down into those mantras, the things that I needed to tell myself. And one of them is to imagine we're on the plane and the oxygen masks come down, and it's this mantra that says, you deserve to breathe too.
That's good.
And sometimes it's this reminder, like, I messed up. And you know what? Mike does too. And so does this other person. Again, most of the time, everyone isn't thinking about you after the event, but I still am. And so these gentle reminders of I'm doing the best that I can.
My mistakes do not define me.
My mistakes don't define me. And I deserve to breathe too, which gets to this, what you said earlier is self-compassion, one of the greatest arts that we can do is the shared humanity, right? And how can we talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend or a coach? Because if one of my friend, if you called me, Mike, and you told me that something like this happened, I would tell you right to your face, you are a good man with a good heart. I would reinforce that without any doubt, with any question, because I see you for all of those beautiful things that you are so much easier than you see yourself.
If we could talk to ourselves the way we would talk, if you could talk to yourself the way I would talk to you, Hana, you're exactly right. Wow.
Yeah.
So I am enough. It's okay that this is hard. It's okay to struggle. I deserve happiness.
Mm-hmm. I sometimes have one that's called this is not an emergency. And I know that's a funny one, but it really is. I tend to get fairly hyper vigilant at times, and I really do have to remind myself in a situation whether because my body is doing the thing that would mean an emergency, and I have to tell it that it's not an emergency, that it's okay for me to be calm, it's okay for me to take deep breaths, it's okay for me to just be with what is versus needing to like put the fire out.
Yeah, that's that whole doom is not coming right now. I'm not about to step off a cliff. Things are going to be okay.
Yes. I'm not about to get killed. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
And it's okay not to know. It's okay not to have the answer right now, right? I mean, these are all just mantras and phrases that are actually true. We know that with our heads, and we have to tell our bodies. So what else? We work towards self-compassion through, how about just reading and podcasts and therapists, and right, we just find sources, right? We find resources, we find places to learn and grow. This is all part of having a growth mindset, right? We believe that self-compassion is probably the most important thing we can develop, and we go for it, right? We find ways to further ourselves along that path through reading, listening.
Yeah, listening, reading, watching, even watching movies and documentaries. Like, again, we get inspired through the actions and the stories of others. And I do think this thing about stories. So tell your story. I mean, that's another way of finding not only compassion out in the world, but self-compassion is the more we can own our stories rather than them own us, then we will have such a way to interact with them in terms of saying those mantras. I can be the author rather than the character, and I can own these stories rather than them still owning me. And I think that's a really important part of, again, what we do in terms of in training and in coaching is we help people own their stories so they don't own them.
That's good. Making space, and this where, as we kind of wrap here, building a meditation practice, finding opportunities on a very regular basis to just sit with self and pay attention, and practice self-compassion, and practice noticing what's coming up, and then giving those things that come up grace and compassion and love. And I mean, this takes solitude to some degree. It takes time away from the fray and from the craziness and from being in the action to just be. And so a meditation practice is, I think, just pivotal to be able to change the course, kind of change the path of where our neuroplasticity has been taking us all these years, as we've beat up on ourselves, right? That we practice a new direction, and we really do literally practice it, and we practice it again, and we practice it again, and we create some new pathways for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think we're in a time where this idea of the loneliness epidemic, pandemic, whatever, it's really important to differentiate. There's that solitude is very different than loneliness. And that I think one of the key parts for us to move forward as humanity is to find a way to own our solitude again versus getting convoluted with loneliness. And one of the key elements of, again, we talk about self-compassion, right? This ability to be connected to myself and all the parts of myself. But we do need to know how to have healthy relationships with others. And that's where we get our data. It's where we get our information, is from those key relationships in our life. And we have to find a way to learn how to differentiate between that data that's coming in as just data. It doesn't define us, but it provides us an opportunity to go sit in solitude or reflect in solitude, and whatever this looks like. I don't necessarily have a meditation practice at this point in my life. I have two small children, full-time job, building a home, lots of other things. But what I do have is time for a walk or a run, or, I mean, we all can find we can find these ways to make space in our day where we just get to be with ourselves. And when I am with myself, I have to be very conscientious and intentional of what that looks like and feels like. This is not a time for me to beat up on myself, but it's a time for me to explore, okay, well, what is the data that I've received? And what can I do with that? And how can I be with this in a gentle way that I can learn from it, versus spiraling into that place of shame and then becoming disconnected.
And you're touching on, as you mentioned, relationships. That is another one. I mean, we're talking about reading, podcasts, meditation, self-talk, mantras, and you brought up relationships. Let's get the nourishment from those relationships. Let's notice the people out there who love us, right? Let's notice the people out there who see our goodness. Let's believe them. Let's actually believe them, right? Let's take in what they're actually communicating to us in the various ways that they're communicating it to us, as opposed to fending it off because it doesn't match. It doesn't resonate with the way I think about myself. So therefore they're wrong. Let's not do it that way. Let's actually learn who we are from these relationships, right? Whether that's Max, my dog, who loves me no matter what, all the way to my wife, Christy, who loves me despite my flaws, to my kids, to you, my friends, right? People do see my goodness. And am I going to call them liars? Am I going to say they're wrong? Or am I going to actually believe that what they're seeing is true, right? So there's a practice.
Yeah. Well, that could take us into a whole other podcast about who are you drawing into your world? Who are you creating relationships with? And how does that reflect this place of gentleness and care and ability to hold all the things? Or are they relationships that pull from you, that detract from that, who are giving you other messages? And really ask, and then we have to get discernment, right, around, okay, what are the relationships that give me this reflection and this energy, and what are these relationships that cost me, and how do I find a balance between those two worlds?
Yeah, beautiful. That could be another podcast. And speaking of which, we're going to need to wrap. You know what? If I was an adult podcaster, I would have said at the very beginning of this episode, Hana, tell us a little about who you are and how you came. I mean, I've had you on the podcast before, but that was, I think, over a year ago. Can we close with Hana? Who are you and how are you? Why are you part of Nash Consulting and what do you do? Give us a little bit of who you are as we wrap here today.
Oh, well, I've been now with Nash Consulting for about 6 years, almost 7. We're going into 7, which is really crazy. I, yeah, who am I? Well, I am someone who truly believes in this work that we do, which is all about what we've just spent the last time frame talking about. How do I find connection to myself and others in this crazy, wild world of humanity? And what does it look like to be a really positive leader in the world? Yeah, so I do lots of trainings with Nash Consulting around our Managing with Mind and Heart curriculum, which I think, again, is not only beneficial for us in our workplaces and our organizations, but very much in our worlds at home and our relationships and parenting. I also do lots of coaching and working with people to navigate how to find more self-compassion and how to work through these limiting beliefs that we've had given to us from our social cultural constructs, and how to find those inner voices that speak our truth and how to hold those with gentleness and also authentic power out in the world. I'm in empire building phase of life. My kids are 3 and 7, and I'm trying to build a house, and have two working parents with full-time jobs, and it's just a bit crazy, but it's very much a good crazy. I'm incredibly grateful for it. It's challenging beyond belief, but it's what helps me be able to show up in these places and be really authentic with what's going on in my life.
Well,
yeah.
Well, thank you, Hana. It's been a pleasure to partner with you these last, would you say 5 or 6 years? It's been 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years. We're almost to 7. Yeah, almost to 7.
The clients you work with just sing your praises constantly, and I think you bring life and just a sense of grace and just wisdom and research to your clients and the client groups. So thank you for all you do, and for this time together. I've enjoyed having a drink with you and this lovely conversation. And folks, thanks for tuning in, for checking us out. Please visit us at www.nashconsulting.com to find all the other cool things we could come and talk with you about and work with your teams or do coaching with you on. Appreciate you being here, and until next time, thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey folks, wait, don't go yet. Please stay with me for 1 second here. I want to let you know about a couple cool little goodies that we have available for you. If you dig this podcast, you will probably also dig our Managing with Mind and Heart newsletter. This is a monthly newsletter where we share articles that we write about, hey, how to thrive as a manager, how to lead teams that are characterized by high morale, engagement, psychological safety, care and respect, collaboration, and high performance. You can sign up for this newsletter by texting the word leading to the number 66866. Additionally, you can go to our website and sign up for the newsletter there. Our website is www.nashconsulting.com. And of course, if you're not already aware, we have our cornerstone program for leaders and managers, and it is called Managing with Mind and Heart. Go figure. This program is something that we often bring into organizations to work with all their leaders on helping them get aligned and singing off the same sheet of music with best practice management skills and behaviors. We've brought this to hundreds of organizations at this point with really good results. And if you are not able or inclined to bring our program in-house, twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, we offer this 6-day Managing with Mind and Heart leadership development program online for anybody that would like to sign up and join us. To learn more about this online course and to register, you can go to our website. Once again, that's nashconsulting.com. Or send us an email at contact@nashconsulting.com. All right, that's all. That's it. See you later. Bye.